What's up, family, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be having a very interesting conversation. I actually wrestled with whether or not to put this in the Black Non-Believer Next Door series, but I decided not to because I don't want to interrupt going through that survey in that series. But this will be, as you see from the title, a conversation about Black atheism. But in this video, the difference is, which a few of my videos have been like this lately, I'm not going to be sharing my thoughts. This is going to be interesting. So before we jump into it, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, consider connecting or supporting our community in whatever way that makes sense to you, and also check out the merch. It's dope. It is dope. And this weekend, I just found out how dope it was. Hey, don't miss out. Our Think Responsibility hoodies are our top sellers. I had no clue until this weekend. Okay, so let's jump into this conversation. Well, first, let me give you some context here. So, obviously, I'm highly interested in social trends and things of that nature, especially when it comes to, I don't want to even say it when it comes to non-belief. That has definitely been a more focused interest as of late. But it's really just sociological trends in particular, learning how we kind of evolve culturally and things of that nature. So I like to pay attention to that stuff. And so I'm always looking for things. And literally today, I came across an article. The name of the article is Our Fathers Not in Heaven, the New Black Atheism. So that's hence the name of today's video, the New Black Atheism. Like, what is the new Black Atheism? And I'm assuming that when you hear this title, other than any other knee jerk reactions, you know what I'm saying? When you hear this title, you're likely thinking that this was an article written, at least within the past 2 or 3 years. You would be wrong. This article is over 10 years old. This was written in 2012. I was still in college when this was written. And this article was written in Ebony magazine, which I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't even know Ebony magazine was still a thing. Tap my hand, whatever. I didn't know. I didn't know. But I came across this article and I gave it a read, and I said, you know what? I think this will be something really good to share with people, really helpful, because as I've stated a few times, that I do kind of hold the view that numbers about religious belief in the Black community, or not even just the Black community, but numbers about religious belief worldwide are overinflated for a number of reasons that we'll continue to explore on this channel. But probably the biggest one is social desirability bias. When we're trying to capture this data through surveys, um, we're still capturing this data from people who are still victims of their context. So we'll talk about that a little more. I want to get straight into this article, and I'm literally just going to read it line by line, and I will share some of my thoughts as we go. But I thought it was very well written, and I just thought it was insightful for people who think that, again, already on my channel, I've definitely done the work of identifying or highlighting for you that atheism, as far as the African American community, is not a new phenomenon. And we've gone back, and we can go back even further. But I'll always mention Hubert Henry Harrison's name, who was one of the foremost Black atheist of the 1920s, and was ultimately the architect of the movement that most people recognize as the Harlem Renaissance, which was definitely very much like an enlightenment period for what they called at the time new Negroes. And so that was probably really the new Black atheism at that time. All right, so this article was written on May 21st, 2012. So several years ago, I pitched a freelance piece about Black atheism to a prominent magazine geared toward African Americans. The pitch was denied, but not for any real reason. That one might be a bit hard, is all my editor said. I'd later come to find out that he was merely sheltering me from his ultra Christian executive editor, who would never let a piece questioning religion run in the magazine. Mm. Black America's religious problem isn't that it's highly religious. Most of America is religious. It's that, in my experience, it's highly religious to the point of exclusion, as if Black people living their lives without God don't count. Black atheists or agnostics are often looked at by other Blacks as alien or pitiable. A Black atheist quoted in the New York Times last year said his mother was bothered more by the admission that he is an atheist than the admission that he is gay. Another in the Huffington Post said that declaring she was an atheist to her Black friends was social suicide. I can understand where they're coming from. In high school, I went on a day trip to a convocation of Black student unions where we were all asked to bow our heads and pray before lunch. I was shocked. I tipped my head out of politeness, but rather than pray, I just sat there and wondered if what we were doing was legal. And I do want to add, I mean, you'd be, and again, this goes to this overinflation, right? And also this context of social desirability, because even the author here is making it very clear, like, I don't believe in this God at all, but I still tipped my head, just kind of out of politeness. That's social desirability. I tipped my head. So now, if you walked in the room, how would you measure who's religious or not? You know, you would technically be looking for the people who are not participating, but that's just not how. I'm going to use the word congregate, but that's just not how social congregating works. There are plenty of people who go to football games and clap and not know what the hell is going on, and not be invested in the game at all. There are plenty of people who who were literally in mid conversation when the wave started, was not paying attention to the wave. But once the wave gets to them, they're going to stop their conversation for a moment, jump up, and get back down and get right back into their conversation, not giving a fuck what's going on with the game. So if we measure things by the way they look, then we've already forgotten the lessons that we've learned that led us to the need for microscopes, stethoscopes, and I was about to say horoscopes. Let's leave those alone. But the point is that you got to look a little deeper than that, right? And you're probably going to need some more tools to find. And this person is a perfect example of that. And then just as a former pastor, this is something that I saw quite often, that people who didn't believe, out of respect for others and out of a desire not to be shunned, would still participate in the practices. You know. A few years later, during my freshman year in college, a Black girl asked me what church I was going to attend, as if it were as certain as asking me where I planned on eating or breathing. When I told her I wouldn't be going to any church, she wrenched her face away from me aghast, like I'd vomited onto her lap. "Oh," she responded. "Okay." We literally never spoke again. I can't remember exactly when the last line of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" address began to bother me, but I think it was sometime around sixth grade. That was the year my history teacher had the class sit through all 14 hours of Eyes on the Prize, memorizing dates and important heroes and the names Selma and Little Rock. Growing up with a Black history buff father, I'd heard the speech many times before, but I'd never pored over it in conjunction with a deep dissection of the civil rights movement as a whole. And when I finally did, I just couldn't get over that last line. One day, if everyone does get free at last, I asked my dad, why would we thank God Almighty? Why not thank ourselves for working hard? My father, who had been raised in the Baptist church and converted to Catholicism for his first marriage before leaving both, is the person who gave me my initial skepticism of religion. So he laughed at my question. I also want to highlight that though this is a common phenomenon, when a person converts, because of marriage or because of a relationship, that's already a high indicator that they really don't give a fuck about the belief system. All right. I've been raised with these people my whole life. They don't give a damn about this shit. This is to keep mama proud, you know. And they've all just kind of got locked into the programming. But anyway, all right. So it's because you believe in a certain kind of God, he answered. After a long bit of silence, you believe that God provides you with everything. It's like thanking the sun for an ear of corn. You wouldn't be able to get the corn without a farmer or a truck. But before those things, you need the sun. I always thought that was an elegant description of why some people thank God for even the smallest things, but it never fully sated me. And as I got older and more interested in what my ethnicity meant to me, I grew increasingly troubled by how linked so much of Black history and thus modern Black America is with religion. To begin, there are the Reverends King, Abernathy, Joseph, Fred Shuttlesworth, Al Sharpton, and Jesse Jackson, not to mention countless others, both alive and dead. After escaping from slavery, Frederick Douglass was briefly a preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And I will add to that was very briefly. Booker T. Washington taught Sunday school at his Baptist church in West Virginia. And when he was appointed president of the Tuskegee Institute, he said that the school should be sure to impact the moral and religious life of the people. Harriet Tubman believed the intense dreams she had of salvation and freedom were gifts from God. Even early America's preeminent Black scientist, George Washington Carver, put his faith in the Lord, saying that the key to his success was a Bible passage. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. I'd say all of these I'd say none of these with the exception of Harriet Tubman are examples or evidence of religious belief. Instead, they would be evidence of cultural occupation, you know, especially when you study the actual writings, particularly speaking of Booker T. Washington. And where was the other one? Darn it. Oh, yeah, Frederick Douglass, for sure. Carver is a little different. His life is shrouded in a lot of history. And then just, well, I guess that's not but it's like even early America's preeminent Black scientists. And I'm just like, oh, so what happened to Benjamin Banneker? So that's just me thinking. All right. Elsewhere, there is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. There are the Christian hymns turned folk anthems. Go tell it on the mountain. This little light of mine, we shall overcome. That bathe civil rights marches and even more Christianity. There is the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which mentions God 4 times compared to the single mention in the Star Spangled Banner. There's no mention of God at all in the abridged version we sing. Now, I will share here that I personally, don't get mad at me, this is just me, I don't recognize Lift Every Voice and Sing as the Black national anthem. I don't. There was a Black national anthem before Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I want to say Ethiopia, Land of Our Fathers was the name of that song. It was actually voted on by a Congress of Black organizations around the same time that the Pan-African flag was voted on as well, from which you get the um, red, black, and green. This took place in August of, I want to say it may have been 1917, but it could have been like 1920 or 1921. But yeah, and so while it did have religious themes in it as well, um, it was also a little more committed to African American liberation and then Pan African unity. And Lift Every Voice and Sing is just a very passive, okay, forgive me, passive and pitiful song. Like I don't like it. I've never been a fan of it. First time I read the words, I mean, you think about it. You just compare the Star Spangled Banner, to lift every voice and sing. One of these songs is about fighting for your freedom. The other one of these songs is about singing for God to set you free. Ah, nope. All right, sorry. There is Black liberation theology, a form of worship that seeks to combat racism via biblical principles and narratives. Black liberation theology became somewhat of a household term in 2008 when Barack Obama's pastor, Jeremiah Wright, was accused of being a radical purveyor of it. Yeah, I remember that. And Jeremiah Wright was a proponent of Black liberation theology, as was I. And I still am in a very interesting way. I'm like, well, if you're gonna be a Black preacher, if you're gonna be a Black Christian preacher, at least interpret the scripture through the lens of the needs of your people. Like at the very least. But Black religious life is always extended beyond Christianity, of course, to notable Muslims like Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, Yusuf Latif, Yazan Bey, formerly Mos Def, and the many, many Black Muslims who aren't famous. There's also an increasing number of African American Jews who have had some mild fame, at least since Sammy Davis Jr. converted. All right, now, when you're dealing with the Black Muslims, specifically the Nation of Islam, and I know they won't agree, but this is from a sociological perspective, not a religious perspective. And so, um, uh, even though they use the words Allah, their theology isn't a real theology. It's more so of a pseudo history. And so their religion isn't necessarily based in spiritual principles. Religion is and people are going to get mad at me here, but religion is the cover for the Nation of Islam, you know. And in the beginning, that was kind of the point for religion to be the cover. It was lessons that they had learned from the Garvey movement. Um, Religion gave them a type of protection to still be able to speak to nationalist issues. Now, there are some who are of the opinion that at some point, maybe somebody thought that they could make a lot of money by doing so and get a lot of power by doing so and begin to deviate from Black nationalist agenda while still holding on to Black nationalist rhetoric. And for some, this is the reason that the rift between Malcolm and Elijah began, because Malcolm thought the rhetoric was what we're really here for, and which is why, as in the sense of that he thought we're supposed to be building action around the rhetoric, but he began to notice that every time he tried to build action plans, he started to get ostracized. Yeah, which is why, when he left, or when he got, well, to be accurate, when he got kicked out, because he did try to get back a few times, right? Because a little known secret is that the Nation of Islam had less than 200 people when Malcolm joined. The behemoth it became was Malcolm's work. All right, but the big point there is, I don't know. Like I think, once all is said and done, I think we're going to recategorize a lot of religions and realize that many of these religions are already somewhat atheistic systems, or at least humanistic systems, which that's an argument I make from a sociological perspective anyway, that all religions are humanistic systems. They've just been corrupted by superstition and power, greed, as all human systems have. All right, so it's impossible to criticize the Black community for its history of devotion to God. For a long time, Black houses of worship doubled as war rooms to plan protest actions and galvanize people made weary by centuries of racist violence and legislation. When many Black children attend Sunday school throughout the 19th and early 20th century, they not only receive the standard biblical lessons, they also learn to read and write, skills not necessarily afforded to them, often by law. And just be clear, even though that caveat was added here, about the discrimination aspect in law. That wasn't just a practice for Black folk. That was a popular practice for Southerners, and I'm almost positive for Northerners too, the further you go back, because the church is ultimately where school started, the idea of school. Even like stretching back, like we get the idea of universities from temples, if you kind of interrogate ancient history, you see that even though temples had a lot of superstitious rhetoric, for them it wasn't superstition; it was their understanding of the world around them. The problem comes in when we got a better understanding and kept pretending like we didn't. That's where the problem comes in at. Again, it's like being a chemist still trying to hold on to alchemy. And it's like, hey, bro, we done went through that phase. Um, it's possible to, no, I read that part. So by the time Dr. King was preaching in churches throughout the South, the strength of the Black church was made obvious by how many white supremacists sought to destroy them with explosions and fire. The Klan wasn't bombing Black bars or brothels, and there was a reason for that. There was, but let's okay, these are the things that I just have to call out. This is a false equivalency and a slippery slope, false dichotomy. Okay, so um and this is the stuff that is easy for people to fall into. Because you hear this all the time, and politicians do this, and it literally creflows my dollars every time I hear a politician do this. The strength of the Black church was made obvious by how many people sought to destroy them. That's not how you measure strength. The strength of the Black church would be made obvious by results. Anything less than results doesn't speak to strength. Okay? It may speak to potential threat, but it doesn't speak to strength. It only speaks to perception of threat. Okay, so this is like a case in point where we need to understand that what the Klan is learning about the Black community is coming from the media. The Klan has no special insight into the Black community. So when the media says these events are happening at the church, the Klan knows, oh, let's go bomb the church. That says nothing about the strength of the church. I wanted to point that out, um, because these are just little tweaks in our reasoning that we have to make, because that's how we keep propagating the false narratives, and the narratives are 100% false. I think it was either Hulu. I think Hulu did a special on Aretha Franklin. I think they included it in the Genius thing that they were doing, and it's some yikes in there. But I do encourage you to go watch it, and then after you watch it, just go see if you can research if any of the things that they showed about her father in his life was true. And I'm not talking about the more controversial stuff that stuff was. I'm talking about him highlighting how churches typically had to be paid in order to get involved with the civil rights movement. They had to be begged. And then most times it was people who were not a part of what was called the civil rights movement. It was people who were part of the Black Power movement, and people who were part of SNCC, the Nonviolent Committee, who were many free thinkers and liberals who were using the church because the church had space, but the church was not volunteering that space. Most churches were trying to stay out of the way and stay out of it, you know. But these other organizations, which were not church affiliated, which were the organizations that were responsible for feeding kids. And again, I just remind people over and over again that the greatest accomplishment, the greatest brag that people have from the civil rights movement is, I got hit in the face for you. And I'm like, I'm sorry, bro. I need a little more than that. You know, when I sit in on Black community meetings, and the things we're asking for today are the same things we were asking for in the 60s, I have a hard time calling that a win. You know, like I said, I'm not a person. I'm not a person who sits on the sidelines. I'm a person who's been involved with this work for the majority of my life, and so I speak with sober eyes. You know what I'm saying? And sober ears, not with the mind of bandwagon propaganda and anecdotes. Um, but yeah, so I didn't like that. The Klan wasn't bombing black bars because nobody was organizing at black bars. The the Klan wasn't bombing black brothels. Like, I mean, come on, bruh. Like, you know. But that's again, I don't like that type of logic when people do that. It's very misleading. And even though that's not her point, but like I said, it's just I don't know if this is a her or not. That's an assumption. But blacks are now the most religious ethnic group in America, with 86% saying they're very to moderately religious, compared to just 65% of whites. Even blacks who purport to have no involvement with any church, mosque, or synagogue whatsoever are generally unwilling to accept the God of entirely, concept of God entirely, making Africans also the least likely to call themselves atheist or agnostic. All right, now, so I want to highlight something here, and this is just the definition of religious. And many times, I think even in the secular community, we fail to make this distinction. Just because somebody believes in something supernatural doesn't mean they're religious. Religious speaks to habit, what you habitually do. Religion doesn't speak to your belief; it speaks to your behavior. Belief is bigger than religion. Okay. What you believe about the world is bigger than religion. Religion is your behavior. It is what you religiously do. Even in Catholicism, the nun wears a habit, because this is the habit. And so, I know there are people who call themselves religious, but listen, if they do not go to church on a regular basis, they don't meet the definition of religious. If they do not pray on a regular basis, they don't meet the definition of religious. You know, they can call themselves religious all day long, but they don't meet the definition. You know what I'm saying? That's like Rachel Zoziel, who called herself black. You can do it, but you don't meet the definition. And I think if we're going, for those of us who are committed to clear thinking, we should recognize when people are lying, even if they're lying to themselves. You know. And so yes, and I think when we do draw those distinctions, then we'd say, no, the majority of black folk are not religious. Not by technical definition. At best, you can call them culturally religious, which means if they just so happen to be in a room where people are doing religious things, they're not going to be weirded out because it's going to be a part of their culture. They're going to understand the language, you know, but that's not where they're going to live. And that's not going to govern their life. And they're not going to go to polls to vote on it. All right. So, for us, people of color with no devotion to religion whatsoever, a tiny minority within a minority, the internal culture clashes can sometimes prove awkward. It's the culture clash that I find so irritating and ugly. And the job of airing the black perspective on cable news is very often given to people like Reverend Jackson or Reverend Sharpton or Roland Martin, who has a master's degree in Christian communications from Louisiana Baptist University, an unaccredited religious institution. And none of these people are people that I've ever been fans of. I don't care that so many African American leaders are steeped in deep religious tradition. I don't care that those are the people. I care that those are the people called upon to speak for all of Black America, and they always have been. Now, this is a problem that I've been calling out for a decade because these are the things that leads to this propaganda. These are other reasons why I'm not a fan of the way political parties, either of them, the dominant ones. I'm not a fan of the way that they relate to the black community. In my humble opinion, it's absolutely disgusting. It is absolutely irresponsible, and this person is right on the nose here with it. Because the thing is, like, well, they're gonna say it, so I don't have to say it. All right. Most white Americans are religious too, and yet MSNBC or CNN would never call on the pastor Joel Osteen to dissect the problems facing all white Americans. The networks would understand rightly that Osteen's deep religious conviction makes him an inapt spokesperson for a group of people with diverse beliefs. That those networks don't afford blacks the same respect is telling, and it's a tacit acceptance of the myth that blacks in religion, particularly Christianity, are one and the same. So that I don't come off as someone content to reject the status quo without offering a solution, I'd like to make a formal nomination. I nominate astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson as the black leader America needs in the 21st century. I don't think Neil would accept that nomination just because of what I know about him a little bit. But I do get the point, and the point is valid. Though our numbers remain small, African Americans willing to out themselves as agnostic or atheist represent a growing category, with one report finding that the percentage of blacks calling themselves non-religious nearly doubled from 1990 to 2008. And then remember, this is written in 2012. To that end, it's important to begin moving away from the nearly monopolist religious religious persons have had over professional black leadership. Yes. Like even now on LinkedIn, I don't join black professional groups because they're all permeated with, Jesus did this for me. And I'm just like, oh man, this is not what I'm here for. I was about to say some stuff, but it was probably going to make me come off as elitist. But yeah, I don't like that because I'm like, oh no, this is why you're not going to really advance in your career. But anyway, um, this doesn't mean we have to stop listening to Reverend Sharpton and Jackson. I'd rather that we did. Rather, I'd simply like us to start listening and seeking out the opinions of blacks who eschew religious faith in favor of finding motivation and glory outside the church. Okay, here's the reason why I want to say I'd rather that we stop listening to Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, because they're fucking celebrities. Okay, that's it. And the proof of that is the only thing they do is talk. I ain't got no respect for that, especially when we actually have blueprints of people who did the work. And so the fact that so many people didn't pick up and do the work, you know, to stop the Black Panther movement, they had to kill upwards of 20 different people to slow that movement down. To stop the civil rights movement, just one person. Those are things that should make you say, you know. Anyway, I think we discovered that many of the opinions religious blacks may think of as churchly are actually similar to those held by non-religious blacks, which would be a lesson in and of itself. So why Tyson? Not only because he self-identifies as an agnostic and says that there is no evidence to support the fact that anyone benevolent created the universe, but also because Tyson, whose Twitter account and YouTube reputation are stuff of internet legend, seems to be possessed of an inquisitiveness from which I believe that the entire world could learn. Before reading the last paragraph, I do want to highlight, number one, I know that I'm almost positive Neil would not accept that nomination because Neil doesn't like to be called on stuff as the expert on black things. He's just like, he'd rather be called as an expert on astrophysics, which is what he does. But I think that drives home the point more so, because we do have black economists, we do have black sociologists, we do have black psychologists, we have black lawyers and black legal professionals, we have black judges. But when it comes to a lot of what gets platformed of who gets to speak for us, the people who get the invitation are not those who are most qualified to speak on it. And that goes beyond even just religion. Because if it's not a preacher, it's a fucking entertainer. And I don't have any disregard for entertainers. But if we're talking about economics in the Black community, why are we talking to an entertainer? Like, we can talk to them about arts in the Black community, you know? Like, why do we keep, but, which then, of course, does a disservice to the Black community, because then little Black kids will probably not watching the news anyway, but Black people are then not seeing Black economists and such on and so. But anyway, but no, so I get the point. I don't think Neil would accept that nomination. I think he'd sit on a panel and have a discussion. But I will say that there are people out there who are doing the work. And it's something that it's always disappointed me when plans were presented for Black people. And when I look at the list of the names of the people involved with the plans, as far as Black people, I'm always like, and I don't mean this against anybody, because I know that our entertainer brothers, they're passionate, and our entertainer sisters, they're passionate, and they mean well. But I think we need to align our passion with some strategy. We have people who've been doing the work. We have Claude Anderson, some who's actually served, in politics, served in the White House, and I'm like, man, you know, Randall Robinson. All right, I'm not going to get to names. Okay. So, one of the things that irritates me to no end about Black churches is how many of them spread noxious homophobia. This is so true. Many white churches do the same, of course, but those aren't the ones preaching to communities being ravaged by HIV and AIDS. Again, that's a fallacy. I hate when, okay, well, what I think what the mistake that people make here when they overinflate issues in the Black community, they're like, oh, these numbers are higher in the Black community than they are in other communities, and it's like, well, these numbers seem higher because you're not looking at a true depiction of the numbers. You're looking at you have to consider the relevance mechanism of being 13% of the population versus 65. You know. Just had to put that out there because I don't like those distinctions sometimes, because and of course you can only write so much in an article, so I'm not saying the person did anything wrong. Because I'm talking about it, I wanted to hit that. To be fair, Al Sharpton has come out against the Black church's anti-gay nonsense before, yet it still persists, supported by pastors who believe the Bible, both condemns homosexuality and trumps whatever any mortal like Sharpton says. That's always the problem with heralding a holy book while attempting to scoff at what people believe the holy book says. It's hard to have it both ways. And just to be clear, you're not scoffing at what people believe the holy book says. It says it. And I think that's the disingenuousness that we don't point out there. Like, no, it says it. Even when talking to my gay friends, when I was deconverting, I'm like, why would you still choose to be a Christian? That was my question, because I was undergoing the same question for myself as an African American, as a descendant of Africans. Why would you choose to be a Christian? Now that you see not only how the book has been used, but you see what the book says. Like, why would you choose to do this? I was counseling one of my gay homies, and he was like, I just want this church to receive me. And and some of you might take this a little differently, but it is what it is. And I told him, I said, I want you to understand something. That might be a little toxic on your part. You want your cake and you want to eat it too. Like, you don't want them to stop being bigots. You want to be embraced by the bigots. You know what I'm saying? But now it's much more complicated than that, for sure. Because it's not just wanting to be embraced by the bigots, it's wanting to still be loved by Jesus. Or at least that's the language we use, when in all actuality, in most cases, I can't say in all, but obviously the ones I've dealt with have been in music a lot. So in most cases, it wasn't even that's the language, I want to be loved by Jesus. But the reality was, I just want to use my gift. I want to still come here and sing. And there's no other alternative where I can do that just kind of freely. And then if I'm good at it, eventually turn it into a career in a way that I don't have to go out here and grind my ass off. And that's one of the opportunities that churches offer people. And so this is one of the reasons why I say a lot of times when you think that this community is just everybody's religious, you have to use a very shallow definition of the word religious for that to be true. And you have to actually not interrogate why people are engaging with church, because it's not because they believe this shit is true. Like my granny, as she got older, started going to church, more and more and more. But half of the time she'd be saying, I ain't giving that preacher my fucking money. You know what I'm saying? These are the things. So, I'm just saying there's nuance to this. And this is mainly for everybody who just thinks like, oh no, it's always going to be this way. You have to first define what this way is beyond just your anecdotal observations. And that's what I'm trying to remind people of. Propaganda persists because people don't take a thorough concern into the reality. They just accept based off of the availability heuristic, that what I think about the world is an accurate reflection of the way the world really is. And in most cases, you're 100% wrong. Because then once you actually look into the data, you actually start having the conversations, you actually start interrogating the phenomenons, and you begin to realize that the world is a much different place. It is a very much different place. And the quicker we build communities that create that option, you will see how that inflation will deflate, and we'll begin to see the world as it really is. All right. So thank you all for hanging out with me for this conversation. I hope you enjoyed this. I will link this article in the description, so that way you can read it for yourselves. Again, it's from 2012. It was produced in Ebony magazine. I didn't even know it existed. And that was around the time that I was deconverting, 2012 to 2014. And by that time they said, black atheism in the black community had doubled, between sometime in 2008. I can only imagine what those numbers are today, you know. But all right, thank you all for hanging out with me. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. Consider supporting the channel in any way that makes sense for you, and check out our merch. And until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and if you can, stay beautiful. Oh, and go on Amazon and check out my book, Christ Held Up. It's dope. And then you can check out my other book, Memphis, Family Under Fire. It's dope. And you can check out, I can't get my thumb over there. I can't get it. There we go. And you can check out Baby Girl's book, Words of a Shattered Mind. It's a book of poetry for those of you who like poetry, and it's also available on Amazon. All right, I'll holler at y'all later.